My husband stared at the floor while his sister smirked and said, "You signed those papers, remember?" I felt every eye turn to me as the old lawyer cleared his throat and reached for a different file. Then he said, "Before anyone says another word, I think we need to read the original version. My name is Danielle Carter, and I'm 34 years old. I work as a hospice nurse. That means I'm the person people call when things get hard, when someone is fading and the family doesn't know what to do next. I hold hands, I manage medications, I stay calm in rooms full of grief. I do it because I genuinely care. But here's the painful irony. While I spent years being steady for everyone else, my own life was quietly unraveling in a house full of people who smiled at me on holidays and planned against me in private. I married into a family that cared deeply about one thing above everything else. Image. Status. The appearance of being important. They talked about property values at dinner. They compared careers at Christmas. They kept score in ways they never admitted out loud but everyone felt. And from the very beginning, I was useful to them. I organized things. I showed up. I helped during health scares and drove people to appointments and brought food when no one else thought to. But useful and accepted are two very different things, and it took me longer than I'd like to admit to learn that. I kept telling myself that patience would eventually earn me a place in that family. What I didn't see was that I had slowly stopped being Danielle and started being a function. Someone they could count on to carry the weight while they carried the credit. My husband, Joel, was kind in the early years. But somewhere along the way he developed this habit of choosing what he called keeping the peace, which really just meant letting his family say and do whatever they wanted while I stood there and absorbed it. He never thought of it as betrayal. He thought of it as avoiding drama. I stopped seeing the difference. What they never counted on was this. I'm not just patient. I'm observant. I notice when stories change. I remember dates. I catch the small inconsistencies that people reveal when they think no one is paying close attention. I wasn't rich. I wasn't glamorous. I didn't have the family name or the old money confidence they walked around with. But I paid attention. And in the end, that mattered more than anything else in that room. Before the real story begins, I want to ask you something directly. Have you ever been the dependable one in a family or a marriage, the one who handles everything quietly, only to realize people mistook your reliability for weakness? If that question lands somewhere deep, stay with me. Because being the steady one doesn't mean you don't have limits. And this story is about what happens when someone finally reaches theirs. Subscribe if you've ever felt invisible in a room you helped hold together. And before I get to the moment that changed everything, go ahead and hit like or click hype. You'll want to be here for what comes next. Now let me tell you what actually happened. Joel's grandfather, a man named Edwin, passed away after a long illness. Edwin was old-fashioned, private, and deeply particular about who he trusted. He had a house, a modest investment account, and a strong opinion about loyalty. When he got sick, the family descended with opinions and arguments about antiques and property lines. I descended with a medication schedule, a blood pressure log, and the willingness to sleep on a cot in his spare room during the hard weeks. For months, I managed Edwin's care. I tracked his prescriptions, drove him to treatments, called his doctor when something seemed off. The rest of the family visited in waves, brought flowers, took photos, and left. I stayed. Edwin noticed. He told me more than once that he saw exactly what I was doing, and he appreciated it in that quiet, direct way that older people sometimes express love. After one hospital discharge, he held my hand and said he was going to make sure I was taken care of. I believed him because he wasn't the kind of man who said things he didn't mean. When he passed, a family meeting was called to go over the estate details. I went expecting clarity. What I walked into was something else entirely. My mother-in-law, Patricia, came to that meeting with a folder. A new folder. She slid it across the table like she had been rehearsing the move. She said Edwin's original intentions had been misunderstood, and that a newer set of documents clarified that I was not entitled to the portion of the estate tied to caregiving. The house share. The stipend Edwin had mentioned to the family lawyer directly. Gone, according to her papers. You were just the help with a wedding ring, my sister-in-law, Renee, said. She didn't lower her voice. She said it in front of a room full of relatives and watched my face to see what I'd do. Joel's father, Gerald, leaned back in his chair and added, "Let's not pretend Grandpa meant to reward a nurse for doing what nurses do." I looked at Joel. He looked at the floor. And then he said, barely above a whisper, "Maybe it's better if we don't make this messy." I felt something shift inside me right then. Not just hurt. Something colder and much more focused. The extended relatives were watching me. Some looked uncomfortable. A few looked like they agreed with Patricia. And I sat there realizing that this meeting had not been called to include me. It had been called to remove me publicly, with witnesses, so the whole thing would feel final and difficult to challenge. That was when Mr. Halpern, the family lawyer, an older man with reading glasses and a reputation for being unimpressed by theatrics, frowned at the paperwork in front of him. He didn't speak dramatically. He simply said, quietly and carefully, "This doesn't match my records." "Where is the original file?" The room got very still. What I found out later was that the planning had been happening for weeks. Group texts I wasn't in. Lunches I wasn't invited to. Patricia had been telling relatives that I had inserted myself into Edwin's final months for financial gain. She said I was calculating. That I had seen an opportunity and taken it. She reframed every hour I spent caring for that man as manipulation dressed up as kindness. A cousin repeated the story at a family lunch within earshot of me, loudly enough that it wasn't accidental. I sat at that table and I did not cry and I did not argue. I listened. I filed it away. And I felt something I had been slowly losing for years start to return. Clarity. Then Joel came home one evening and asked me to sign a document. He said it was temporary, just to reduce legal tension while the estate was sorted. He was calm about it. Practical, he said. Just a formality. I read it. The document would have waived my right to legally challenge any changes connected to Edwin's estate. It was not a formality. It was the closing of a door. "I'm not signing this," I said. "You're making this uglier than it needs to be," he told me. I didn't respond. I went to the bedroom and I opened the folder I had been keeping since the early days of Edwin's illness. I had started it as a care log. Medication times, dosage notes, appointment records. Practical information for a complicated situation. But that family created chaos everywhere it went, and so over time the folder had grown into something else. Voicemails from relatives saying they couldn't make it to appointments. Text chains where Patricia told Gerald that Danielle can handle it while they made other plans. An email thread where Renee asked to be kept off the caregiving schedule because it interfered with a vacation. And one voicemail from Edwin himself, recorded the evening after a particularly difficult hospital discharge. His voice was tired but clear. He said, "Danielle, I want you to know I've told Halpern what I want. You're the only one who actually showed up. I'm making sure that counts for something." I had the dates. I had the messages. I had the voicemail. I also had something the family didn't realize I'd noticed. The timestamps on the newer documents didn't line up correctly. Certain signatures appeared on dates when specific relatives were documented to be elsewhere. I had proof of that too, from photos they had posted publicly on social media, tagged locations, the kind of thing people forget about when they're building a lie. I wasn't going to confront anyone yet. I was going to wait and let them believe they had already won. After the meeting, Mr. Halpern asked me to stay behind. The room cleared and he sat across from me and said, without any warmth or coldness, just directness, "Your grandfather-in-law wasn't confused. And he wasn't careless. He told me discrepancies in documents were not something he could overlook. He told me the family had pressured him before, in smaller ways, but what he was looking at now was different. He asked if I had anything that might help establish a clear timeline. I showed him part of the folder. He didn't dismiss me. He put on his glasses and leaned forward and started asking specific questions. We spent nearly an hour cross-referencing dates and statements. Then he scheduled a formal follow-up meeting, mandatory attendance for all interested parties, at his office. When Patricia heard about the meeting, she was annoyed but confident. She told Renee, loud enough that it got back to me, that Danielle was just delaying the inevitable. They thought I was exhausted and isolated and too emotionally worn down to cause any real trouble. They were not paying attention the way I had learned to pay attention. The day of the meeting arrived cold and overcast. Mr. Halpern's office smelled like old paper and wood polish. The family settled into chairs like people who had already decided how the story ended. Patricia smoothed her jacket. Renee checked her phone. Gerald sat with his arms crossed. "Let's keep this brief," Patricia said. "This has already taken too much time." Mr. Halpern placed two files on the table, side by side. The revised version the family had presented and the original file from his own secured records. He didn't raise his voice. He simply opened the original and said Edwin had left a signed statement and a handwritten note specifying that Danielle Carter was to receive a protected portion of the estate directly connected to her demonstrated caregiving and documented loyalty to him in his final months. Renee broke first. He'd never leave anything important to her. Mr. Halpern looked at her evenly. He did. Repeatedly. And he documented why. I placed my folder on the table. I walked through it calmly. The messages showing family members declining care responsibilities while publicly presenting themselves as devoted. The timestamp inconsistencies on the revised documents. The social media posts placing certain signatories in other cities on the dates their signatures appeared. And then I played the voicemail. Edwin's voice filled that quiet office. Tired. Clear. Grateful. No one spoke when it ended. Then Mr. Halpern said that introducing altered estate documents into legal proceedings carried formal consequences worth considering carefully. He said it without drama. He didn't need drama. The documents said everything. Joel leaned forward and started, "We were only trying to correct some confusion." I looked at him directly. "No. You were trying to erase me because you thought I was too tired to fight back." He had no answer for that. Neither did anyone else. The extended relatives who had watched me absorb insults and rumors in silence were watching something different now. A few of them looked at Patricia in a way she clearly hadn't expected. The room had shifted, and she could feel it. "I want to be clear about something I said before we left that office." I told them I had never wanted to take what wasn't mine. I wasn't there for Edwin's money. I was there because he was a human being who needed help and I was capable of giving it. What I refused to accept was the rewriting of that truth. I refused to let them turn years of real care into a convenient lie that made them look better and made me disappear. The legal process moved forward with the original file restored as the foundation for all estate decisions. The revised documents were set aside pending formal review. Patricia, Gerald, and Renee were left facing questions from the very legal process they thought would protect their version of events. Joel and I had a different kind of conversation in the weeks that followed. Not a dramatic ending. Not a movie moment. Just a quiet, honest reckoning with the fact that silence in the face of someone's cruelty is its own kind of choice, and he had made that choice too many times for me to keep pretending otherwise. I chose peace with real boundaries over loyalty that asked me to keep shrinking. They thought quiet meant weak. They thought dependable meant controllable. What they discovered, too late, is that the person who stays calm and pays attention and keeps careful records while everyone else is performing is often the most dangerous person in the room when the truth finally surfaces. They tried to remove me from the story. They only ended up making sure my part in it couldn't be ignored. If your family has ever tried to rewrite the truth to push you out, you know how deep that kind of cut goes. It's not just about money or property. It's about being made to feel like your sacrifice never counted. Subscribe and share your story in the comments. Tell me if someone ever tried to erase your role, your effort, or what was rightfully yours. This community is for people who have been underestimated in rooms where they should have been protected. And if this story reached you today, click hype to help it reach someone else who needs to hear it. Standing up for yourself is one of the hardest things a person can do, especially when the people you trusted are the ones you're standing up against. If you've been there, subscribe and become part of this community. Let me know this story helped by clicking hype. And tell me where you're watching from. I genuinely love seeing how far these stories travel.